Yeah. Which I'm prioritizing.
Yeah, I would put this stuff in testing.
That's
I
one
imagine
too.
that there's gonna see something happen.
I got you.
one you sent out? Or that's on the wiki? Or do I need to
Yeah,
look at the one?
yeah.
It's the same one.
This one's
Okay.
This is weird.
Thank you.
Okay, I just sent out the one you sent. You have a timer, Lauren? Or?
There, yeah.
No, I do. I was making sure. Yeah. Cool. I'm ready to go whenever everyone else is.
That's okay.
Okay, yeah.
Great.
So we're good?
Yeah, ready.
Okay. Contention 1 is material coverage. Millions lack insurance and even more are underinsured. Alternatives that delay ending private insurance will suffer the same material health impacts as the status quo. Only single payer reverses this scheme, and 72 million go through banks every year because of both surviving insurance, and there are 20 million without any insurance. Their physicians with fewer insured and waiting times can be likely widespread. Disparities spending any further care or suffer worse. Alcohol to multiple payers of proxy is massive and expensive. Insurance are finding sharp premium increases and threatening to exit more markets. They become clear that as long as they rely on multi-payer profiteering, leave out increasing number of single payer NHI is the only financing alternative. All gain access to affordable comprehensive care, but rather become full choice position. The rest of single risk full comprehensive single living in a funding for the entire population. The money overhead will be funded by a plan where 95% pay less than you do now. Tens of thousands of preventable deaths year after year result in millions of death. Material access is key. 130 million lack insurance. Reportedly startlingly mentioned millions who have insurance can't afford it due to high deductibles. 32 million uninsured means 33,000 people died needlessly last year. A landmark study showing for everyone willing to insure there were 1,000 deaths that were not necessary death every 16 minutes. They offer 20 cents of thousand of this year in and year out. Contingent 2 is agency. Health markets rely on a false notion of choice. Alternatives that default to these markets ignore that choice can't truly be exercised. Public redistribution schemes like the plan are a prerequisite to countering unjust health disparities. Parental and 12 disparities and capabilities to achieve good health rates. Social justification, time and choice that individuals truly possess regarding their health and one. Should government do to which they influence and negatively impact healthy personal favor tells that a population level are strong social justification to support government action to reduce disparities. What means are both necessary and effective for reducing disparities, but distribution once becomes important. Legal mechanisms are not true to solve every problem. Legal mechanisms are demonstrably the most effective way of reducing health disparities. True health equity requires adoption of legal mechanisms. Without such a framework, the result is that disparities will widen. Voluntarily initiatives result in little impact on the most vulnerable population of market. Initiatives fail only candid acceptance of the critical role of legal mechanisms play can achieve health equity. By itself, Ted Cruz style choice fails. This very rebuttal often circulates false narratives about agency. If markets were blocking access, patients that like privilege can and would exert agency. Hudson and 15 understanding patient participation is complex. Also, where casting while choice exists, it does not exist in a vacuum. Marginalized patients are able to emancipate from the discrimination and adequate resources built choice patients. In this study, I demonstrated agency resistance contrary to assertion of marginalized individuals might not to be adequate patients demonstrated attempts to understand the best attempts to obtain the best possible care and miss substandardized resources. Their lack of understanding concerned marginalized patients. Agency participants demonstrate behaviors that form the cornerstone of patient activation. Medicine once exerted power over patients. Such concerns are increasingly dated. Health is now a site to invert dyads of power. Hudson and 15 polyobserved that power is keywords with the power to influence patients may have exerted power increasingly savage patients complete the negotiation for power. Previous literature features a history of physician-dominated legal roles have evolved for many years. The physicians were expected to exert dominance in the 21st century. Care centers, patients with immigrant participation, the evolution of oral health provided platform for a diet shift in power. This thesis holds true for patients that lack privilege who want the option of access. Healthcare case, hamper patient agency, and rest on the false essentializing drum of the passive patient. Hudson and 15 priests has examined the inherent power and balances of physician manages the agenda. Our findings demonstrate participants were comfortable exerting their agency. Participants were strategically to ensure that all needs could be addressed. Participants assume be active while discussing diagnosis and treatment. All their participants who consist of low-income black patients demonstrate the agency with physicians. These interactions coupled with explanations of how resources often need to show that it is safe to within the patients who are equipped to exercise agency when interacting with the physician. This can combine given that much literature not reflect the population this way. Strategies consistent of patients participants effort to protect the norm of recommended diagnosis for treatment plans. The app gives patients the resources to exert agency and seek alternatives to bad doctors. Miller and 16 rather than an illogical system based on physician bias that behavioral care healthcare should be based on treatments that deliver the best care of the proper system. If PCC details single payer might play a role in mitigating biases of the physicians under single payer. Patients are nurtured by a public funding process by often complex to navigating the insurance system single payer. What makes up advocacy easier? We're a middle ground. No one is forced to go to the doctor or accept care, but now one could if they wanted to. Universal skepticism inverts the error, reaching a deeply personal conclusion on every patient's behalf. That denies agency, which upholds a framework of work. Even if fiat isn't real, the app is an external advantage that teaches and upholds notions of contingency and agency. So, in 17, it would be hasty to assume the hope can be acceptable simply by having some positive effect. The positive effect of planning might be conditionally connected to the hope that motivate the planning. Consider a political activist even helping political change not generate any benefits. Person can tell of reason to hope that reason to engage in planning and fascinating about the outcome that is these activities are essential to the person being made always there's some person team of it into which hope it does or does not fit. Cancer patient activists have reason to keep hopes up in the absence of instrumental consideration, giving up hope until the unavailability of those lines of reasoning. The patient activists themselves resign themselves a more forswear hopeful activities insofar as they are resigned to. It is no longer true that her consideration may constitute reasons for them to act. We would not want to deny that we might have reasons to involve the loss of hope. We only need to argue that it is sometimes understandable for people not to want to. Agency dependency, part of what it is to be a person who engages in strong evaluation. Such strong evaluation have it as essential to a framework of worth. A decision about whether or not would be acceptable to be some other kind of patient must be made from within the framework of the constitution. The of whom considered losing their responsiveness is the loss of values fundamental that are fundamental to their being. Plain, the United States federal government should end private insurance schemes in favor of becoming the single means of payment, a single means of financing for healthcare coverage in the United States. Contingent 3 is solvency. An ontological political thesis is defensively wrong for 2 reasons. Contingency and empirics is offensively violent for 3 reasons. Hurts agency causes material trade-offs and idealizes alternatives which worsen the ethical conditions and critiques this card is really long. Beverage in 17 we critique the post-political thesis by highly problems the ontological themes of policy arguing that the binary of problem 6 police orders too narrow to capture contingency, vegetable, urban policies, universal understanding of policy roots, plurality, political agency assertion, suggests that non-infinite orders while lacking empirical basis such claims to make the possibility of resistance and emancipation of a post-political thesis institutional politics are created obscure the hindrance stress performance efforts made within institutional will obviously ineffective and overly sort of a better order. This thesis has greatly been challenging the UL thesis of policy by being supported because some ideas and actors are simply soundly foreclosed. However, there's problematic understanding the binary perspective relies on contingencies that subordinateness. The pure political will only be apart from the same problem is the empirical consequence of adopting these positions in real one. There may be there appear many actors who would challenge the single order or something exchange of the so-called police order whether the institutions can make a difference. Can hence the binary condition should be problematized. The reformers can lose their import their intrinsically part of the reification of the apparatus conception. The idealization of rightful intervention. There is nothing apart from radical gesture which most strategic options were remain open and stretch to overcome and unless engaged with the existing institutions of non-radical policy, reproduce the very condition wants to protect but not directly engage with institutions of power. This extremely narrow concept will agency loves us will hope of breaking free precisely because it's so seldom in its occurrence. So most of the thesis as a theoretical reference rather than a conclusion based on the basis of detailed empirical investigation of the thesis to hold that condition has to be presupposed contingency explains why it seems hard to put down post-politics and the content consciousness and the effect nature of institutionalizing decision making. The literature is fatalistic tone. There's no reason to act small even the likelihood of achieving change. However, the sounding that researchers are going to find that likelihood of change nor should they make ontological claims that buffer they even effectively negate the importance of institutions before they even appear the thesis provide persuasively to written is better than empirical ontological grounds would offer more open perspective of the potential struggle of political agency. Contingent policies should be ontologically accepted for health, pessimism, root cause, and ontology claims are wrong approaches which reject health insurance and transformational material violence. Gaffney and 16 days legal chance of black American apartheid, black infant death, we're hiring Jim Crow, yet the difference of effort, little change, legal improvements, how blending of the chasm in health and environmental racism. But what is the cost of health and quality differences in access and being uninsured? No factors. Matthew, this case for a legal remedy for racial health and quality keys the law. Sentencing by black cases that have analyzed sexual health litigation throughout the country made equal to law. Actually, like people in the unconscious Matthew Marshall literature from various levels to enter in the affirmative evidence and malleability structure like intervention of the advices outcomes suspending blacks are disproportionately uninsured companies these include a million seems critical about would universal care do much of a single pair of replicate current biases. To some extent the answer is yes to both, but even if biases persist the universal system might be a powerful tool in reducing racial health inequalities. Evidence comes from a quasi-single payer system in the USC VA effectively eliminates some racial health inequalities. VA the risk of overall death with longer among blacks or death there are still biases that work in but the egalitarian health system might itself be a very powerful tool in equity where it's quality of access is often ignored in discussion. The negative should not win just because another agenda is good. The F and egg approaches may differ, but we set a high bar for declaring that both of them competitive. That's especially true in the positive material approach. The F discussion gets falsely pitted against moral ontological or ideal option. The Carson and on the consequences of argument on binding ontological stability. This is not an agenda I say it's not something to be a desirable endpoint in and of itself. I would like to move towards something new or particular ways of thinking. There's the logical fallacy called the fossil one that occurs when an argument starts representing two alternatives and then goes on to make fallacy something that there's two alternatives opposite of each other opposite which makes not feel real impossible. This is from distinction to the dichotomy of best and notion sets the stage to recast two apparently unrelated concepts of being two diametrically opposed concepts. Similar pursuing false economies past persuasion says the understanding of the economy of the material and the ideal opposites to take the form of X and NTX are perfectly balanced such that I believe mutually exclusive of our combined opposites bits of material against the ideological is eloquent to make sense of the ways in which we interact with one another. within the world. In the context of healthcare, root cause arguments are wrong because material amounts of populations that lack privilege or discussions are important because they break down contemporary understandings of healthcare that bring insurance leads to business transactions. Caruso and treating research exposed to health disparities, particularly impacting African Americans and Americans group have higher rates of morbidity, cause of death, and equal medical care is considered a consequence of broader inequality in the health funding system, reinforces the institutionalized inequality, unequal care being viewed as a form of structural racism. ACA, plans care high human subplans, particularly impacting those selecting rebels. Many cap savings are other assets and principles of corrupting insurance based on the way that students are trying to think about healthcare. Many classmates fees healthy versus a business transaction. The single payer program is the best possibility for equitable healthcare movement supporting it consistently for the sake of profit and the fabric recognize health as a necessity not a commodity. Reserved for those looking after one economic ladder not a scheme for discrimination while apple money. The single payer not solve all social inequities clearly moves in that direction. The AF will get redeployed for negative purposes. Flowers and 17 is home pressure. The repeal AXA is my part of the world purpose to keep people organizing the solution. The important organization we can reality the public demand for single payer strong no countries adopting universal healthcare and then go back to probable across the political spectrum or expressing for single payer or expressing for single payer maximum from any universal healthcare public policies that will only benefit the wealthy and the but hope for the different values of higher grades well-being of corporate profits. Mark the guard of profits.
Great, you ready?
Yeah.
What are the impacts to when we deny people agency?
The Sell evidence says that agency is necessary to uphold a framework of worth, which is, I guess I can unpack that. It's the idea that in order for anyone really to make a determination about anything that affects anyone, then there needs to be some modicum of agency that exists within those individuals as sort of a prior question to whether or not we can interrogate that in the first place.
Okay,
It's
great.
sort of an
Is it
abstract
like an
concept.
ethics argument? Is it a moral argument?
No, I don't think it's like a moral obligation argument. We just think that agency is important.
Okay, in this prior question. That makes sense.
Prior
Great.
question. It's just an important
the
thing.
plan ends private insurance schemes. How do you enforce that?
Well, the AF makes it so they're illegal.
Illegal.
I guess. So,
Okay, so
there's no more private insurance in the world of the alternative. There's no
So what
economic
happens
incentive
if
for.
private insurance happens in the world of the affirmative?
What's that?
What happens if private insurance?
Well,
continue to
private
operate?
insurance doesn't have any sort of economic reason
What
to
happens
exist.
when something's illegal?
Well, okay. I should re-clarify my usage of the term illegal. By illegal, I don't necessarily mean like people go to jail. I mean that like there is no reason for private insurance
So
to exist.
no one goes to jail?
Okay, so
If
yeah,
there's
I'm not.
private
All right,
insurance.
I'll.
I got
I'll-
you. Or you have you.
No, it's fine, we're good.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's your
Private insurance is obvious.
That's okay. Gotcha. Your argument is that you should. The plan text says that the USFG should finance health services. My question is, why should the world have money?
Why should the world have money? I mean,
We don't take a stance on whether or
Yeah.
not the world should have money.
Okay.
We think-
Yeah,
can
like-
Okay,
I
I
have
got you.
one more thing to add to that. We think that money exists right now.
Okay,
And,
great.
yeah.
How does that interact with your contingency arguments about why we should endorse contingency?
well, we think that
Okay,
let's
so
use your
there's
money.
just money right now, so we
Well,
should
yeah,
just
I'll
limit
use
it.
your money example. So
I
we
got
live
you.
in a world with money. It's a little bit difficult for us to imagine a
Okay.
world in which we pretend that money doesn't exist.
So it's
but
hard
the
to
app-
imagine that world, so therefore we should do the app?
No, I think that the app has supported a contingent instance in which positive material effects can be made,
Oh, okay.
even if that works
I
within
got
an
you.
overarching
Great,
structure.
I got 1 minute, I got two more
Sure.
questions.
No, I
What is
understand.
constituted by medical care in the app, and who determines what is care and coverage?
Do you want to?
Yeah, so we don't define what health means or what care means.
You-
We are a financing mechanism for modes of care. So
Okay,
there
so it
are-
could be any claim of care can be reimbursed.
The
So
human
I-
evidence sets a floor, not a ceiling of
Yes,
what we cover.
exactly.
Okay,
It talks
so-
about things like physician and hospital care, outpatient, dental vision, rehab.
Cosmetic services.
Why not?
Can I ask for a house?
I don't know if that
Okay,
relates to.
I'm curious about why that, so it is not, it is
Okay.
a floor, or it is a ceiling.
Well,
There
Okay.
is-
Great, my last
Okay,
argument,
health
I
class
guess,
is
what's
a
your
ceiling,
theory
but-
of gendered violence?
I'm sorry.
What's your theory of gendered violence and why gendered violence occurs?
I think.
We think that having a singular explanation for gender violence is not a legitimate way.
So your government evidence indicates that there's
disparities
disparities in regards to gender, why do those occur
Yeah,
in the
so
world?
we'll argue for contingent commonalities.
Or could you give me an example of gendered violence?
There are lots
There
of
are many.
examples of gender violence. I don't think that's necessarily
Okay.
the point I was trying to make about contingent commonalities between
Okay,
instances.
I got it.
Do you all want to use their standard?
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, of course.
Oh, actually, we're good.
Oh, okay.
What's there if anybody can
Okay.
One, and then the case.
the case is the coverage flow. Is that okay?
You can put it wherever you want it on the case, because when I say the case, I'm not going to
Okay.
put things I say on the case.
Okay.
Give me a second to pull it up.
Same.
I haven't pulled it
My computer is super slow. Let me see if I can fix.
right, we good? Great. We will posit four disadvantages to the affirmative. First is coercive consent. The plan demands the USFG institute a massive health insurance expansion on the basis of non-consent. Social contract theory, the foundation of the U.S. nation state, are premised on the idea that valid social contracts are ones instituted through tactical consent, i.e. nonverbal consent through the use of government services. We think not only is this a violent method of doing politics, but also implicates consent. In the world of the planned single payer frames itself as a public choice, but is it really a choice if you are coerced into accepting? Coercive consent teaches us to rat on those who refuse to consent to the social contract to align ourselves with the good and the moral. The impact is that the act facilitates a mass crackdown on insurance fraud. Their internal links for solvency are based on a unification of data into national health databases that the police, doctors, and insurance contractors all have access to. In the world of the affirmative, in the world they build, government has legal impunity to A, crack down on those engaged in illicit economies. Anyone who does lab work and blood tests that are positive for drugs, the government has complete authorization to use that data for warrants. Peace of point, the government can and will plant evidence on sex workers, people who sell drugs, particularly queer and people of color and black people, which opens up these people to death by the state. They will use health data as a reasonable suspicion to come into someone's house and arrest them for non-obedience. Cops are always above the law and should not be trusted to be ethical actors in the world of the affirmative. Law requires law enforcement, which includes the way in which police deputizes at politics like the affirmative to manage domestic consent. Second in dissat is financialization. They financialize health and care. Their solvency claim is predicated on the monetization of healthcare services, the calculation and reimbursement of those services. It says that psychic and bodily injury should be computed and appraised for value, and that our networks of care should be predicated on that reimbursement. There's two implications. One is negligence. Their advocacy makes us both as advocates and doctors negligent towards each other. When people come to us with injuries that exceed our capacity for reimbursement, makes us hyper-focused on counting pennies and balancing the ledger instead of making unconditional commitments to give whether we have what we can give and whether we have what we can give. It teaches us to care only when we can be reimbursed, specifically in the context of structural injury and dysphoria that are never ending and ongoing violences. Dropping a lump sum of money on said injuries is more injurious because their solvency is predicated on the invocation of banal and quotidian violence. Second implication is hoarding under the name of state protection. Financialization is fundamentally about propriety and property relation. It teaches us to enclose the means of production, particularly intellectual means, in order to sustain market value. It teaches us not to give our skills to others, which creates scarcity to retain the value of the commodity. It makes us negligent care facilitators in and outside of debate. Incentivizes doctors to make patients come and go in order to make the most money. Third dissat is sociality. Doctors, nurses, EMTs, pharmacists, and secretaries are not neutral, but are raised and trained in a social order that determines gender variance and incoherence of medical risks and cisgender performance as synonymous with healthy existence. The common refrain, I don't care if it's a boy or girl, just if it's healthy, gestures to the way in which white bourgeois conceptions of manhood and womanhood become the basis for defining health itself. Reaffirming gender assignation is not just valid but neutral. The national nuclear family lays the groundwork for national conceptions of health, disease, and purity. Gender nonconformity is calculated as a risk to the health of both the nation state and the family. The affirmatives focus on access. Their neutral and vague interpretation of health services to operate as a reflexive enactment of social balance and the access of care that they receive. Two implications. One, preferential touch. White cis kinship determines who we care for and who the social wants to touch. Alicia, a 23-year-old Pakistani transgender activist, survived multiple gunshot wounds and then passed away in a hospital when authorities kept her waiting for over an hour when they could not decide if she should be in the men's or women's ward. In 1995, Tyra Hunter was refused emergency medical care after a car crash because the EMT left her to die after seeing her genitalia. Sociality teaches us to save the white woman and child first. At the scene of the crash, prefer to touch what is natural and human. In other words, white cisness operates as a decision-making calculus that determines who gets first saved and who is preferred to be held. This means there's an independent Ryan White dissat. State funding decisions and allocations are structured by a social order that determines what injury gets incentivized, researched, and cured. The plan extends and maintains the violence of the medical encounter by scaling up sociality to the terrain of national policy. The second implication is cisgender naturalization. When you go to the doctor to receive hormones and surgery, cisgender is rendered an undetectable force. It incentivizes and invisibilizes itself within trans-inclusive health practices through the rhetoric of trans people exist, just like cis people. They deserve access to services too. Don't you know that trans people are disproportionately lacking insurance at the USC doctor's office? They make you fill out a checklist when you first arrive asking if you experience dysphoria and if you are interested in medical transition. These practices are praised for being trans-inclusive, yet naturalized gender assignation for everyone who checks no. The doctor always reaffirms cisgenderness as an invisible category that is healthy and normal. The affirmative intensifies the naturalization of assignation and more broadly cis heteronormativity. This creates an insidious form of dysphoria. We internalize our bodies can only ever be what we are told they are because that is all they can be. It is works of politics of sterility that works to cleanse the messiness of transgender, purify the operations of gender ideology from the field of medicine. Dysphoria is a violence at the level of the intimate, which is the terrain of health itself, creates a violent disconnect between your body and the social order, creates a psychic and material violence, and holds you hostage in a state of life and death. Their neutrality, our health access proves this. Fourth dissat is conditional care. The plan forces a reliance on medical professionals to determine what kinds of health will be cared for. Bureaucrats will control medical procedures or as a coverage. Cosmetic surgery, palliative care, homeopathic medicine are all at the mercy of budgetary decision making and medical calculus. What gets counted as medical care also determines what kinds of care the app provides. The impact is cruel dependency. Single payer tells us it saves our lives, but refuses to think what it refuses to cover, forcing a cruel dependency on the structures of governance as the only site of care. The act works as a sword of Damocles hanging over the head of everyone who needs it. When care inevitably gets retracted, we won't have the skills to build infrastructures of health, interdependency, and care for one another. David Wajanowitz writes, "At least I won't arrive at one day at my 80th birthday to even my possible death and only then realize my whole life was a lifetime adaptation of the pre-invented world. I am busying myself with the process of distancing myself from you and others in the environment in order to know what I feel and what I can find. I'm trying to lift off the weight of the pre-invented world so that I can see what's underneath it all." My friend across the table says, "I don't know how much longer I can go on. Maybe I should kill myself." I asked him if tomorrow you could take a pill that would let you die quickly and quietly, would you do it? No, there's too much work to do. Each public disclosure of a pirate reality becomes something of a magnet that can attract others in a similar frame of reference. Such each public disclosure of a fragment of private reality serves as a dismantling tool against the illusion. The general public disintegrates, and what happens next is the possibility of an X-ray of civilization and examination of its foundation. Every gesture carries a reverberation. We have to find our own forms of gesture and communication to reflect our needs. With gestures enough, we can deafen the satellites and lift the curtains surrounding the control room. Thus, we affirm haptic healthcare. Haptic healthcare is care without reimbursement, care that creates the conditions to refuse to police the state, the ways in which social violence touches us intimately, and our abilities to care. Harney and Moten tell us that in our logistical capacity to be the means for which other hapticalities, the touch of the undercommons, interiority of sentiment, to feel that what is to hear, that what is to come is here. Hapticality, the capacity to feel through others, for others to feel through you, for you to feel them feeling you. It's not about who's holding you down when you try to jaywalk, it's about who's holding you up. This is the question of hapticality. The police can't hold what's already held at the same time. What's already held is all that we can hold. That's our haptic institution. The revelators' hands are held up not to the cops, they're held up to us, holding us up. All hands, all those mouths must look demonic to them and clear. It's clear to put yourself in that. Such chances may come to be held up by such chances may reach you. Just because there are no rules for access doesn't mean we don't know what to do. The undercommons is never elsewhere. It is always, its touch is always a reach. Its touch is a rest, a caress. Hapticality occupies these rooms with a tap stroke rhythm of love. Haptic healthcare is a different kind of reimbursement that stays in debt in study, open to non-reimbursement, and care that exceeds reimbursement. The provision of health services from our various positions and situation locations, the refusal to hoard and privatize resources, the refusal to count pennies then when we know our hands hold coin. Haptic healthcare is trans masks and femmes pairing up in the 50s and 60s during raids of gay bars. Haptic healthcare is coming together and out prepared for resistance because we know that Cooper's Donuts, Compton's Cafeteria, and Stonewall were not prescribed. They were just another night of homosexuals, gender variants, street workers, and sex workers coming together to check in on needs and desires, but also coming together just to be with. Halberstam writes, "The mission is to recognize that when you seek to make things better, you are not just doing it for the other, you must also be doing it for yourself." While men think they are turning to feminism, while white people may think they are opposing racism, no one will really be able to tear this shit down until they realize that the structures that they oppose are not just bad for some of us, they are bad for all of us. Gender hierarchies are bad for men and women, and men as well as women, and they are really bad for the rest of us. The coalition emerges out of your recognition that it's fucked up for you. I don't need your help, I just need you to recognize this shit is killing you too, however much more softly, you stupid motherfucker, you know? Case. Single payer facilitates global data centralization, which relies on the destitution of transitivity. Mackenzie 17, the data we are collecting around people has the same property as nuclear waste. Lifetime is longer than any institution that manages the big data is nuclear toxic. Consumer data used in national security intelligence classification metaphor is instructive for thinking transidentity management and information data created about trans people do not disappear when individuals change their name, although describing an identity that may no longer exist. It lives on tied to their assistant and debts that may be sold to third-party data brokers, surrendered to the police, stored indefinitely in data warehouses. Data stick to individuals, matching them to the moments when their past selves are made contact with the state and is may decay, but it's still capable of causing still capable of harm. Transidentity management has a clear temporality. The abuser systems of identification on trans people as state and financial sectors. Investment in data collection as a risk aversion ensures that trans person's former name might stick to that person indefinitely, emerging in unforeseen moments. While the state may allow some trans people to update their IDs to big data surveillance traces of a trans person's former identity to present or make a trans person's legal identity effectively invalid. Stop trying to pay the debt. Moten and Harney 13, when you talk about this other kind of debt, you're talking about history of aesthetics, love, organization, not merely what you want to abolish, but also what you want to live and how you want to live it, developing some ways of being with each other. I remember being little in Arkansas with my grandparents. My grandfather would give somebody a ride like 80 miles from our town to another in his 69 Buick Skylark. There was a ritual process. My grandpa would give you a ride, and before they get out of the car, the person would say, "How much do I owe you?" And he'd say nothing. Why would you even ask me some shit like that? But if someone got out of the car without asking that shit, he'd be like, "Son, don't be like that. The reason you ask how much do I owe you is that you could be engaged in this ritual process of disavowing the very idea of owe. You begin to practice improvising the relationship between necessity and freedom, not on the grounds of owing and credit, but on the grounds of unpayable debt. This is not a distribution of politics anymore, but an experiment in letting yourself discover new needs and your abilities and new abilities and your needs in the rhythm of and not against general antagonism performed between the two and amongst the many. When you find the abolition of credit, you find study. We don't need anything to get in debt together. Policy rules hope like tear gas into the undercommons. Harney, Moten, and 13 finding is self-sufficient at social level begins with militant preservation policy deputizes those willing to break up the means by diagnosing planners that those who plan have something wrong with them. They won't embrace change. They've lost hope. They need to be given hope. The policy is rated in the exclusive and exclusionary uniformity of contingency is imposed consensus, which denies and seeks to destroy the ongoing plans of fugitive initiations that lack operations of the multitude. Policy arrest them in contingency, flexibility, and administered precarity. Policy is designed to separate you from others. The ones who survive the brutality of survival are said by policy to lack vision, to be struck in an essential way of life. Every utterance of policy is first and foremost a demonstration of one's ability to be close to the top of the hierarchy of the post-Fordist economy. I'll mark it on post-Fordist economy.
Okay.
Okay.
Are you ready for crossfit?
I am ready for CrossFit.
Okay, I'll start with the first card that you read on case about
Okay.
data centralization.
Yes.
So after you end the card, it talks about like credit report centers. I
Yeah.
guess it doesn't really talk about healthcare.
Okay.
Does the alternative get rid of credit healthcare centers? Does the alternative get rid of
The alternative
data centers?
disagrees with credit.
What's up?
The alternative disagrees with credit.
Okay, so you think that credit surveillance is bad?
I think that credit is bad.
Okay.
That includes
Okay.
credit.
Okay, sure. Same with big data surveillance that the state does?
Sorry?
Same with like the big data surveillance that your evidence
What
mentions?
about it?
Oh, well, I'm just saying, does the alternative get rid of it?
We don't think data surveillance is good now.
Okay, sure. You don't think it's good. Does the alt like get rid of it, or just attempt to
The
sort of?
alternative does not
move
surveil
away.
people for their data, does not
Sure,
detonate
sure,
people
sure.
by tying them to whatever identity forms
That's
they have in the
perfect.
past.
The critiques alternative, haptic healthcare.
Yes.
Let's say in the world of the alternative, somebody needs glasses. How do they get glasses?
You can get glasses from your friend who works at a convenience store that sells glasses.
Well, who makes
Yeah.
those glasses?
Okay, so our argument is not that like people shouldn't make glasses. I think that's a ridiculous reduction of our argument.
Well,
I think
okay.
that we
well,
have
also
the ability
convenience
to
stores
care for each
don't.
other.
we-
We
Convenience
have
stores
the
also
ability
don't
to
just sell
make-
glasses because you need to get like a prescription for them because they need to test your eyes. Who tests your eyes?
Our
Do you
whole
not
argument
think
is
that
about
queers
creating-
got skills?
Yeah.
So you.
Like, you don't think
So
that
just-
we can't do eye tests?
Weird
Your
people on the
argument
wall.
is that
This is
only
So-
the state has the ability to test
That's-
eyes.
this-
You're gonna
okay.
go for that in the 2AR?
No. Our argument. I
You don't
just,
think-
That's the case.
I just wanted to clarify. I
Yeah,
just wanted to
yeah, yeah,
clarify if
No,
that's
no,
what
no.
happens.
That's
here.
our argument about using our skills that we have. We have to
Sure.
stop
And
internalizing
building
the
further
idea
skills.
that we can't care for ourselves.
Okay.
That the state's the only one that can care for ourselves.
Okay.
This is our argument about contingency and our argument about agency.
Sure. I'm going to go on to the critique. The financialization argument
Yeah.
that says that once we exceed reimbursement, the state will be negligent towards providing care. I guess what reimbursement is
So
that?
our argument is that
It's the deductible limit.
our argument is that we should not make care into a transactional relationship, and that is
Yeah.
what the affirmative
So
does.
our Caruso evidence explicitly indicts that and says that single payer rejects the idea of it as a business transaction and instead understands it as a
Okay,
necessity.
and that is
I guess, can you
a
unpack-
very restrictive understanding of transactionalism, because our argument is that single payer, as you said in the cross-ex, is a finance mechanism.
Yeah. Okay. So
In fact,
just
you
think
didn't
that-
even want to talk about what it means to provide care, what kind of
Precisely.
services, the skills that we should develop.
You said we'll defend a finance mechanism
Yep.
and not the kinds of care the plan gives.
Okay.
Which is the link, among many.
Sure. Okay. Alternative is not conditional.
We're going for haptic healthcare.
You're going for haptic healthcare. Okay. And do you have any other questions? Or are we good?
No.
Okay. There's like 10 seconds. So.
Yeah.
10 minutes?
10 minutes. Yeah, you got it. Or actually, no, I'll say it because I'm doing it.
I'm gonna run to the bathroom, but okay, just send you on my computer.
Okay.
Sorry, my computer's super slow. I'm touching it right now.
It's all good.
Everything's faster.
So how's everyone's day going?
It's going well.
It's weird being on round 2 of the day and it's 2:20 p.m.
Yeah, that is the
But-
thing. It's only around 5.
Yeah.
It's around 5, but I'm only judging the first of my commitment.
Oh,
my
so
goodness.
This is the last of mine.
Revco got his first 4 knocked out in the first 4 rounds.
that's actually.
I'm hoping with like the
I know,
80
I
extra
agree.
rounds in the pool, maybe I'll get a freebie in there.
They've been using people.
Oh, I know what happened, but
Yeah, no, they certainly have.
hope. That's what I got.
You should.
Yeah, Jeff, you started in the same way that
I'm
you started
touching it right
yours.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to judge one more round on them, so, and I had originally had this one off, obviously, but I decided because I have to judge 2 of the next 3, as opposed to all 3.
Okay, finally agreed to send.
Yep.
Case, agency, solvency, okay. Alex, can you pass me the stand?
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
What's the order on case?
Coverage,
Agency solvent.
agency, so, yeah. Whew. Is everybody good? Oh god, please open one more document. Okay, thank you. Alex, you're trying to right?
Yeah.
Okay, sometimes our timers break. Anyway. Single payer solved tens of thousands of deaths annually. Doesn't even include the millions of risk insurance, nearly 500,000 preventable deaths in a decade. You should view the rounds. Through the lens of our coverage flow. Our evidence is great on single payers' efficacy to resolve healthcare issues. Now, Gaffney speaks explicitly the positives of doing something to help, even if it doesn't solve all problems. Obviously, we don't solve every problem effect of free bodies, but that doesn't mean it's not meaningful and good to make healthcare accessible and free for everyone. Extend beverage and answers their third card on this flow ontology as explanation for every active balance lacks an empirical basis because it can't explain counterexamples contingency better explain some phenomena. It's not accurate to assign actions to an institution before the institution has come into existence. Their theory eliminates the possibility of emancipation in any field. Challenging the existing order can occur through the state successfully without becoming the state or being complicit in its balance. The alternatives idealized radicalism statement without result that reproduces the status quo. The data turn. It's not real. Nothing about the app necessitates data centralization. Just because some single payer systems do doesn't mean ours must. Results in any residual impact on patients' own health records. No info misuse. Illegal justification. Harry 15 patients are the McKenzie evidence is record agency. The plan doesn't link, and the all can't solve McKenzie 17 is work from monitoring the living reproduce identity economic series. So there's a center of this network. The death, and there's no link. Don't let the race plans and twisted or nowhere. Anywhere did we say that we try to solve the debt? What the heck, agency? USC does not know best. Black populations deserve the chance to decide how they want to interact with healthcare systems. Single payer provides universal and complete access. Underprivileged populations are capable of exercising the agency to access healthcare in a critical way that counteracts current biases. This turns the cruel optimism thesis. People can and should be able to decide whether or not to invest. Hopes and people want to imagine a better future, and they deny them that agency in the hope that they might want to have. Now, the K ultimately says patients don't deserve the option of coverage because they will underestimate how bad care can be. Reject that on a representational level. It circulates violent tropes of the passive black patient. Solvency, framing issue, treat all arguments, true to proven otherwise. Refer to slew of evidence that they have failed to respond to, all of which implicate alternatives' ability to solve. And the links, and Carson, their links are fallacies. Because two versus two problem may differ does not mean that they are diametrically opposed. The slippage to dichotomy throws the baby out with the bathwater and is a bad mechanism for problem solving. An extended beverage above it's a super good card. Extend Gaffney health insurance, specifically pessimism, root cause, and ontology claims around structural changes are necessary and an important part of addressing anti-blackness, which means we are able to solve the contingent impacts on our agency advantage. Gaffney says that in the face of deep-rooted racism, complete structural changes, a point of important material pushback is a point of important important material pushback contingency. Understanding violence as contingent is the best way to approach politics. First, obviously some violence is gratuitous, but it's always shaped by contingencies, and even if there are contingent commonalities, overarching cookie-cutter explanations, or worse, refusal to accept contingent explanations makes you unable to explain counterexamples. It requires giving up all tools at our disposal that could change the degree of violence which matters. Second, insisting on universal explanations is not just defensively inaccurate, but offensively leads us towards solutions that assume solving ontology will remedy everything, but there are a ton of factors embedded within the structure of privileged ontological explanations. Don't get into all the things that make up power structures. They are the flip side of the same coin. They become the equivalent of a new false hope where everything will be remedied if we just do this one overarching thing. This is a reason to vote out the lone proves that anything coming out of their method is indeterminate layer. They can't get out of this because the one is permeated by ontological understandings in their scholarship. It's meaningless without them. That's fine. Okay. The role of the ballot is assessing mechanisms that create successful practices. This should include proving the mechanism is a bad approach, infinite potential frameworks, shift the debate to arbitrary questions that moot our ability to formulate and compare outcomes, turns the ultimate decision making, which outweighs centering the debate, running predictable locus is key to prep our nuanced education. Perm to both, perm to the plan and non-mutually exclusive parts of the alternative, and perm to the plan and the alt. In all other instances, Carson impacts normally, which can weigh this argument. Public policy discussions and their position may differ, but should not be viewed as diametrically opposed. This thinking pits all agendas against each other and reifies the same balance. The attempt to critique the first. I'm just said there is no forced choice. There's no forced choice. When patients are accessing doctors and cracking down on illicit dealers, it's a status quo because of accreditation standards. This is fundamentally not unique and is in no way made worse by the affirmative health insurance giants. Aren't what their arguments are talking about. And that's the only thing that is made illegal. Under the affirmative, which also answers. Their viewpoint now that claims that there are no good options and that providers learn anti-black school rely on a conception of a static notion of health, and it is a dated concept. Their arguments were not prepared to deal with the recency and comprehensiveness of our study. Doctors are relearning what medicine is because the diet of power is shifting. There are some doctors that have anti-perspectives and anti-black perspectives, but it's not all doctors and patients need the option to pick and choose providers and their perspective is violent. It's built on the trope of the passive black patient. You should reject that Hudson if it's the concurrent health and average scholars and so the individuals the marginalized populations are let's active skills consider capacity to understand how black patients do not to see this opposite of contribution for understanding how marginalized patients are active to teaching and such understanding can provide a course of active cardiac factors that can be helped to various Carson Hudson study does extending beyond just black women, but obviously there are black women if they put forward the argument that Hudson doesn't apply, we can read Hudson's characterization of the extrapolation of her study in the 1 AR. Second is our power diets argument postdating all the matters. New studies prove patients no longer accept violent treatments, and it's also a term medical power is currently reshaping the doctors of what doctors learn from patients. Any logical neg offense converts the waiting group to all white. That's not worse. Some black patients inevitably seek care, but ignorance and bias could only be worse. Hudson 15 these findings illustrate with the physician patients in terms of the self encounter the example of these findings demonstrate that black patients are capable of mindfulness of purposes of a physician this preservative for the patient participants are using other to diagnosis and treatment. No state links to reforms are different than reform ism specific fields of progress are good. We remove neoliberal forces from the market. That also applies to the second decide, which I'm going to go to now. No, there's no link. We are markets cross excludes. We are using the tools available to us, but are not committed to or reliant upon them and establishing free healthcare. Also to divorce care from profit. That's crucial. This is about the status quo. Single payer is a key challenge to financialization and empowers broader structural changes. The also is isolated on 5 defeat the third internal link outweighs the doctor bias internal link. The rep is net counterproductive voice filled fab disparities and must be provided understanding of the purchases that they contribute to the socioeconomic disparities are major differences in the public health insurance. There's evidence that there are discrimination on positions of foreign cause of disparities positions is counterproductive. Just contextualize gender as well as race or white spelled. 5 we have discussed socioeconomic disparities and socioeconomic disparities play an important role in for lots of the populations. There are gender disparities and the level short circuit gender policy actually be directed at these disparities. The fourth, said no link in effect install the agrees that hope is often bad, but should be contingently retained. Speaking skepticism violently tells the cancer patient that hope is wrong. It's also violent towards someone documented immigrant quiz of color that one hope and all son. If you know, no future comes over to put we not the arbitrary enemies that are considered make a quiz where they love to face the situation of the most of the city the most of the think about the big all the be able to thinking of the person is from the status quo department solves to hope outside of help will retain patient agency, the alt.
Oh, just make the argument that we'll cover everything that people want.
Oh yeah, we'll cover anything that people want as long as it's health related. That is a very broad definition that would include anything that they have. Any residual link is resolved by the perm. Alt. We'll straight turn the university K, no link to us. University is not monolithic, anti-diplomas are not politics as usual in their case. Denies agency and left in the status quo the to escape to a Chilson of 15. The university has an because of the hierarchy university have never realized like universal knowledge the university has if you're going to get today's over after people at this particular moment we need to motivate as an ordinary institutions and ourselves the university will to revert to says that the class robot the study and the typical year structural effects of the university is every practice lucky just who are with me not particularly approach to the future cut it future their deck it doesn't solve access. Our agency doesn't provide insurance and our advantages that patients want options but insurance and free rec under comments are to itemize and solve the void of 15 in this there's just building against the person that be there's a future or change more prime transfer churches and informal and demonstrated women what one cause the other promises such an advocacy communities that consider a rebellious spirit we're not exclusive with any of their businesses it's just a code for self-academic radicalism there's no state link there was if there was their revolutionary book could never have been written. One second.
The piece of Weisenfeld evidence that you
Yes.
read that talks about gender disparities,
Yes.
what are those disparities?
Yeah, so Weisfeld is talking about how Weisfeld does not list these specific disparities.
Weisfeld says that white women, like members of minority groups, are less likely than white men to receive coronary artery bypass grafts for treatment of
I'm
acute.
sorry, where are you reading this from?
Literally the ununderlined portion of your card. They're less likely to receive.
You can move on.
I'll move on. The piece of Tolson evidence about the university K link question mark.
Yeah, so it's addressing Harney and Moen's underlying thesis.
And it's responsive to the one in C. How?
Yeah, so
Like, where in the one in C do we talk about the university?
Your alt card is under Commons 2013-97.
Yes.
Yes.
We're from a book
Yes.
that references the university.
Hapticality is the touch of the undercommons
Yes.
of the center,
And
the sentiment, the feel
all right.
that what is to come.
The
I don't understand where
Manalassen
you think
evidence
that
about no
reference
future is critiquing Elman from the perspective of Munoz link question mark.
Yeah, it's talking about the. One second. Let me use your words. So when you say in like the fourth disad that there's a cruel dependency on systems, the Manalassen card specifically says that in some instances, people want to have the choice to be able to exercise that dependency and that hope towards systems.
Okay.
Specifically, queer immigrants of color.
Yeah, sure. The permutations in the 2AC, one of them is alt in all other instances.
Yes.
What are those instances?
We
and how are
are
they not intrinsic?
Yeah, so, well, it's not intrinsic because it is doing, again, the affirmative and
In
the
other
alternative.
instances. But what are those other
Yeah,
instances?
which is part of the,
What are those instances?
I mean, I don't have an exhaustive list for you because
I'd
it's
like
all other instances.
It doesn't
but
need to be
anything-
exhaustive. I'd like an instance.
Right. Okay, so you can use haptic forms of communication and communicare.
Credit agencies, for
Credit,
example.
yes,
Okay.
thank you. Credit
Fair
agencies,
enough.
that's one example we're not
Fair enough.
implemented just that.
You said at some point in the 2AC that some violence is gratuitous. What is gratuitous violence and what violences are gratuitous?
Yeah, so by some violence is gratuitous, I'm referring to the fact that there is like overwhelming violence disparately affecting certain populations
Which
that are seen
ones?
as not the
And
norm.
what violences are gratuitous?
We say that there are lots of populations in the status quo that are seen as lesser than, that would
What card in the
relate to
1AC is about
populations,
gratuitous
black
violence?
populations. Right, what, sorry?
What card in the 1AC is about gratuitous violence? Because we haven't posited that claim, and I don't know why y'all are.
Right, so I was using the term gratuitous violence, as I just explained, to be an explanation for like systems, not an explanation of, but a reference to systems of violence that affect broad
Okay.
groups of people.
Fair enough. The piece of evidence that says patients own their own records. Who stores the records?
It says patients own their own records.
Yeah, presumably physicians.
And then it
Yeah,
says doctors.
Yeah. Presumably doctors own the records, which is
Wait,
different.
doctors own the records or store
No,
they don't
no,
own
no,
the
no, no,
records.
no,
They're the
not
caretakers of the
store the
records.
records, which is different than centralization of ownership of records, which is what your lead is about.
Are you all covering that?
Yeah, 10 minutes.
someone had left a Mac charger. Is this one of these not someone's Mac charger?
They were there.
Anyone has a Mac, so you're good.
Take the nicer one.
Would you understand?
I will in just a second.
Yeah.
It'll be the criticism.
Granted.
There is, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm not gonna get to all the arguments. Some of them will be covered in whatever.
Okay. Is it a straight down after the interview?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are there cards?
No. You're very good.
Our alternative is an orientation and practice of haptic healthcare, promoting and hardy hapticality is the touch of the undercommons whose touch is always a reach. Haptic healthcare is about making commitments to care for each other unconditionally. Haptic healthcare is to be the means for each other. Care is a means without ends. Haptic healthcare operates as a form of care that stays in debt, stays in study, that offers care regardless of reimbursement. I will wash your allegiance. Its first tenet of haptic healthcare is using the skills and resources we have from our structural locations. You know how to sew an arm. I need an arm that needs healing. Care for each other regardless of if you get paid. Haptic healthcare is a commitment to care outside of financialization, exemplified by drug cocktail concepts of the 80s that developed medicines and bodily cosmologies coming together amidst disease outside of money. We have to stop internalizing the idea that we cannot do money by ourselves and for ourselves. This is the question of the haptic. This is the question of care. There's two impacts that should frame our link arguments. One is the touch of white supremacy. Our link arguments are about how the affirmative intensifies the ways in which power touches us before we can touch ourselves. As per our Wachowski evidence, white supremacy makes us into pre-invented beings. It denies our agential capacities to build and love on our own terms. It takes away our own consent to live outside of money, assignation in the state. Our alternative is about offering that choice, the choice to love and be with each other outside of money. Their theory of power believes that violence is only a question of access to resources. It's not a question of how we are trained to love, how we are trained to live, to build kinship within the social order. This is also a structuring claim that to frame the affirmative white supremacy takes away our ability to be agents of our own lives, or to truly live without restraint. We have to be able to think about the ways in which our lives have been taken from us. The second impact is dysphoria. Dysphoria is the violent disconnect between your body and the social order that holds you in hostage to a state of life and death. That your life can only be what you have never been. Balance cannot change policy, but balance can change the ways in which we respond and interact with social violence that we are all implicated with, which means that I'm going to link argument you vote negative. The framework, the role of the ballot argument, our interpretations that the judge should vote negative if we have one that the affirmative is undesirable to be affirmed. It cannot just be the plain text. The plain text is good because content always informs the way in which the plan is affirmed. Plan focus debate causes us to separate ourselves from the world, our words, and privatize our link arguments outside of debate or arguments, which is exactly how the violence that we are speaking about can invisibilize and included from conversations about healthcare. If we prove that the link with sufficient impact to the affirmative, that would justify a re-envisioning of the affirmative's plan. We win the debate. The negative's burden is to prove that the affirmative should not be affirmed. The negative's burden in response to the alternative is not to script out a new 1AC. It is to prove that the judge that there is potential outside to our link arguments. You do not get hit in backspace on the 1AC, nor your articulation of the affirmative in the round. The first argument they make is a contingency argument. The case argument, yes, our argument is about you ontologize money, you ontologize the police. Our argument is that you made an argument in the case arguments that their structural changes are possible. That's our argument of how there can be structural changes that we just have to believe in. Your structural changes, that you affirm should be protected there. The next, the permutation. I'll do it here. The permutation do both. The permutation, the word permutation definitionally does not mean combination or mutual exclusivity. It means a possible way in which a set of things can be ordered or arranged. The permutation by performance orders are alternative secondary to their permutations are always framed by the one you see in the way in which the ballot goes. This also proves why starting points are theoretically valid, because starting points are a question of arrangement, not exclusivity. In order for the permutation function, they have to win that everything that they should be affirmed. Their second argument, their second and third permutations about mutual exclusivity and all their interests are separate and intrinsic. All of our links are the presentation of the one you see in this as a discursive. It's probably artifact. The permutation can only solve if it jettisons massive portions of our case arguments as voting issue, the executive engagement impossible if they get shift out of our links. Hold the line on new permutation articulations. They speak last when shortly favors the affirmative. It means that you should hold them to a high threshold of new arguments and link analysis. There's also a pill test on the permutation following Wachorski. If there was a pill for the world of the affirmative to happen today, would you take it and feel ethical about your decision, or would you refuse that pill and take ours? Our pill is one that offers you a choice. A pill that says that we have more work to do, announces that they have settled too quickly on how they think hair and how they think the financial, the first, the coercive consent is said, I do not consent to the police, I do not consent to assignation, I do not consent to this nation state. The affirmative's inability to think questions exemplifies the ways in which there is a coercive apparatus that undermines their affirmation of the nation state and its deputies to the affirmative courses as consent to intensifies violence. The impact is that we consent to governmental crackdowns in the world of the affirmative. So point A, crackdown on those engaged in illicit economies, anyone who does lab work and blood tests positive for drugs. The government has complete authorization to that data for warrants of arrest. It means that the government can and will plant that evidence on sex workers, people who sell drugs, in order to incarcerate them, particularly queer people of color, which opens up these people to death by the state. They will use how data is reasonable suspicion to come into someone's home and arrest them for their non-obedience. Law always requires law enforcement, which includes the ways in which the police deputize people like the affirmative to manage domestic consent, places people who work in illegal industries into intensify precarity because they now have to choose to submit their DNA in order to receive the governmental health care, or to choose sickness, which are towards their disproportionality arguments. Link arguments are also magnified by their ban on private insurance. Working towards the law to end private insurance comes with law enforcement. When I ask them how do you enforce it, they say, oh, we make it illegal. Oh, but then you don't have to go to jail. Well, if your argument is that people don't go to jail in the world of the affirmative, that means that people in the private industries can do whatever they fuck they want because there's no consequences, i.e. magnifies all of the impacts. If you do not solve your fucking act, if you not enforce your affirmative, our argument, which means you do not solve your affirmative, their only argument is that there's crackdown, and crackdown is the uniqueness question. Yes, this is our fucking argument that the status quo is fundamentally fucked because of the ways in which the domestic is always relies on a domestic enforcement, i.e. the police, in order to protect the nation state, which is our argument why we need to have and start to envision a world without the police, a world without money. They made an argument about how the doctors are anti-queer. That's not our argument. It's not about bias, about the neutrality of health, which is the one in our arguments, the Hudson evidence. Yes, obviously patients enact an agency. Our argument is that the alternative says that we should use our agency towards alternative means of financialization. Just I'll do it here. The model of care believes that we should monetize and financialize care. The solvency arguments are predicated and believe that debt and injury are payable and that paying back debt is an ethical obligation. They want to tackle absurd separations between the rich and the poor, but they don't want to let go of money. They believe that rich people should still own what they have, even if it's a lot. They want to narrow the distinction between the rich and the poor, but they do not want to abolish it. Our alternative is that one that posits that money is never a question of ethic or work, never something that we own or deserve. Money is always a question of assignation and inheritance. Instead of giving up some money, we need to give up money in its entirety. This is what haptic healthcare and the politics of indebtedness looks like. If fiat is about radical demands, and we should start making radical demands on each other to give up what we think we own. The link is there. The link is given in 180 Classics. They say that we shouldn't talk about care, that the only thing that provides is a financial mechanism. We are impact turning that logic. It means we should not invest in skills because it means that we do not invest in skills about how to love and how to be with each other. The impact is that the plan solidifies the reign of the white nuclear family. The act naturalizes the global order in which white nuclear family inherits the world, the nation state, with the police to protect them. The world is the ways in which white families have 12 times the inheritance of people of color. It's unethical to affirm the ways in which death. You can't talk about disproportionate death and preventable death without talking about how life and what it means to live in the world and who has access to live in the world that they want to live, to live in the world that they want to live in. Their financialization creates also negligence. Their advocacy makes us believe as advocator and doctors negligent towards each other when people come to us with injuries that exceed reimbursement and see that tax. It creates a new class of beliefs that believes that just because it makes us hyper focused on counting pennies and balancing out the ledger instead of making unconditional commitments to give out whatever we have from where we come from. It teaches us to care only when we can get reimbursed. This intensifies violence such as structural injury and dysphoria that are never ending and ongoing violences that follow us from birth to death because of the ways in which it teaches us to focus on injuries that are countable and can be modified. It also turns the affirmative because it means that preventable death is rebranded in the world of the affirmative. Doctors can give care to be reimbursed and then stops at that point of reimbursement. It means that the doctors are money focused and negligent to those preventable deaths, i.e. the ways in which that violence exceeds always what can be reimbursed. Instead we should begin with the position of indebtedness of the affirmative that believes that begins by believing that we are indebted to care regardless of reimbursement because life means nothing if we are not living with each other. Moten evidence indicates that we find new abilities when we start thinking about what we we need. Their argument about we have to use the tools that are available. This is our argument about you ontologize the tool of money because you think it's impossible to think outside of financialization. You cannot have a critique of inequality without thinking about the critique of money and the ways in which neoliberalism cannot be separated from the financialization of care in the first place. The Hodel evidence is terrible. It says that yes, one progress can lead to more progress. Our argument is that you've stepped in the wrong direction in the ways in which you've naturalized and assumed way too many forms of structural violence and ontologize them in the context of your affirmative. The link argument, the wasteful evidence. Thank you for reading a link. This evidence essentializes bodies to the context of gender. It says that there's a thing called women's health and that there were the women have disproportionate life expectancies to the men. Our argument is that is exactly what causes dysphoria for trans people because it means in the context of the app, I either have to be misgendered in order to access those disproportionate impacts, i.e. you have to go to explain and use dysphoria, i.e. in the world of the affirmative, because it also means I do not go to the doctor because it means I would rather not be misgendered to go to the doctor, which interrogates. Oh, you also kidding? This is also, I'm sorry, this link argument also takes out all of your agency arguments. You can't talk about agency and allowing people to determine their lives by reading evidence that essentializes the femaleness to the body, i.e. the ways in which a woman is the ways in which this evidence posits an essential being. You can't win an agency argument and then assign me a gender. That's not how that works. This is exactly how consent gets coerced. How we, for example, identify with power. The last argument I'm going to answer is this no future, only hope argument. That's our argument, that we need to have hope for another world. You say no future, and you say only our future. Under the police, under money. We disagree with that. Hope for the alternative, hope for the world.
Okay, are you good to process?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I want to start on coercive consent, specifically the sex worker enforcement part.
Mm-hmm.
Are sex workers going to the doctor right now?
What do you mean by that?
Are they making the choice to go to the doctor?
Are we just going to pretend that that's a unified group?
No, that's not what I mean. Like,
Okay.
In your understanding of the problem,
Uh-huh.
are there sex workers that are going to the doctor right now and then that data is used against them?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're making an argument that
Okay.
your affirmative intensifies the
Yeah.
precarious situation that sex workers are
Okay,
always already in,
that makes sense to me. Thank
and
you.
the ways in which consent
in your understanding of the problem, are there sex workers in the status quo that are making the choice to not go to the doctor because of the data centralization problem?
Our argument is that we need to start building a world that we want to live in, and that
Okay, so that
requires a destitution of the police, a destitution of money.
Okay. So that's a yes, right?
What do you mean? The status quo is
To the original
bad,
question,
yes.
the status quo is bad.
But I'm just
Okay.
like, you can't come in this round and win that the status
Yeah.
quo is bad and win the debate.
Yeah, I get what
You
you're
have
saying.
said
Thank
that this,
I understand. Thank you.
Okay.
On the
like, we have to start.
Yeah,
We got
the
also a
second-
question of how we imagine the world.
I understand that, thank you. The
Okay.
CR arguments on the very top of the debate, the
Mhm.
second impact was diaspora. I don't really understand how that links to the affirmative. I would just appreciate a
Yeah,
re-explanation.
dysphoria.
Yeah,
Right, so.
sorry, I just wrote it down wrong.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, the violent disconnect between how the social order sees you and how you see yourself.
Okay.
So trans people were assigned, were read and interpolated in a particular way.
Mhm.
Creates a form of psychic violence
Yes.
because it holds us in a state of life and death where we have to live a life that we never were. I.e., for example, the ways in which assignation creates me into a woman. I had to live a life being assigned and interpolated as a woman, even
Okay.
though I did not consent to it.
Yeah, I understand that. So that links to the affirmative because of the arguments about assignation of care by doctors, right?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure I understood the whole link story there.
Mhm.
The better world of haptic healthcare, are there any centralized structures of distribution that are haptic, or is it like in solely singular interpersonal relationships?
Our argument is that our hands distribute care. They've held us and they will hold us and they will continue to hold us. And trusting our hands and our love that we've held and been held is the coin, is the kind of argument that we're making.
Okay, so in
Right.
terms of like distribution of care, somebody in California needs an MRI and somebody in
There are
Maine-
lots of people that know how to do MRIs. There's lots of people that have
Okay.
MRI
How
technologies.
does-
We believe that they should care without reimbursement. So they should give someone who needs an MRI, right, without
that makes
needing
sense, thank
money
you.
for it.
That makes sense, thank you.
Does that make sense? That's
Yes,
indebtedness.
are micro scale haptic health situations happening in the status quo?
What do you mean by micro scale?
Like,
How do you
from-
delineate between micro and macro?
So I guess it's a question about more of the alternative. Is it spread throughout the whole country, or is it this?
Yeah, we
round?
think that everyone should affirm haptic healthcare.
Okay, thank you.
It's the K where next stops, and then the case I'm sending.
You're sending out cards, you said?
Huh?
You said you're sending out cards?
I am sending a card.
Oh, okay.
I think. It seems my computer is disconnected from the internet. An error occurred. Thanks for letting me know.
Classic.
Oh no, there's no internet connection. Alright,
Who's that? Yeah.
You can, it's only one card, so you can just click on it. I'll just exit.
We're good, thank you.
okay. Is anyone not good?
I'll do the sociality debate here. If I win this, it filters how their advocacy gets interpreted. Remember, very little of the 2AC is responsive. Our arguments point towards a form of medical violence that cannot go by the name violence because of the conflation between health equals cis and trans equals courting death, a social sensory judgment in the doctor's office, the ambulance, with the secretary. We're winning a prior argument about what determines the doctor's treatment plans, prescriptions, and medical plans. Our argument surpasses the doctor, though. Our theory of power imbricates the EMT, the doctor's secretary, in a relationship of state kinship that always calculates gender nonconformity as a risk and gender conformity as the basis of health. Trans people are not simply calling for healthcare access. Medical care goes down in a social order that determines gender variance and incoherence as medical risks. The violence operates on the terrain of social kinship, i.e. the national nuclear family scales up the groundwork for national calculations of what is high risk in opposition to health, disease, and purity. The 1AC performatively renders the 1AC and 2AC performatively render sociality imperceptible. They isolate relationships as important but refuse to articulate the way those are coded by gender, proven by the way that 2AC understands gender violence in context of the evidence text pointed out. It's a network of sociality and that the affirmative relies upon for political coherence. Think of Alicia and Tyra Hunter. They were not murdered because of lack of access, but because they were rendered not worthy of life. Their analytics of describing power are deeply inadequate for describing violence, which is a disadvantage to the affirmative. There are a couple of implications, none of which I have an answer to in the 2AC. The first is preferential touch. Sociality teaches us who we should say first, who we should touch in our health, and who we should touch in our health politics, and who we prefer to health. This form of decision-making calculus determines how the plan happens, which leads me to the Ryan White dissent of the state decisions of funding and allocations are structured by a social order that determines what injuries are researched and cured. The plan extends and maintains the balance of the medical encounter by scaling up sociality on the terrain of national policy. The 2AC says will cover everything that's medical that is related to health, but the definition of related to health is determined by the social apparatus that only we are reading and only we are making arguments about. This is the link to the cisgender naturalization arguments that the politics of what goes into care and what is covered is simply a financing debate renders cisgender an undetectable force. The vagueness of the affirmative, what the fuck relates to health, are all questions that result in the affirmative invisibilizing assignation. Trans inclusion is done through this kind of rhetoric that trans people deserve access to services too without any interrogation of what those services are. Practices such as that are praised for being inclusive, yet naturalized assignation for everyone who checks no. The doctor always reaffirms cisgenderness as an invisible category that is healthy and normal. The impact is an insidious form of dysphoria in the world of the AF. Trans people must reify scientific terms of art in order to receive medical access. For people who decide against hormones and surgery, they must reconcile that with the doctor always understanding their body as male or female, which locks in a sterile politics. And an example of this is that in the world of the affirmative, babies will get assigned gender when they have to go through a violent and injurious process of coming out after the fact because you are assumed to be cis. This is an intimate violence that should be prioritized in spaces such as debate because this space is deeply intimate as much as we like to believe otherwise. Remember though, we're not making an ontological claim. Our argument posits that sociality is indeed malleable, but the affirmative gets the sequence wrong. Social relations of violence are scaled up to the level of policy and law, which means our interventions have to occur at the level of life itself. This is not a pessimism argument. The alternative believes in us, in hope, in our political potential. That was the bottom part of the 2NC, but this does not apply to the plan because that plan is an outgrowth of a social order that promulgates its possibility, which means that the alternative must come first. That's also not a solvency argument for the permutation because it means the alternative must come first. It's basically a sequencing argument. You read this piece of Tolson evidence, cross-examination was LOL about this. Our critique is not about the university, even if it is. Yeah, the university probably isn't a great place. However, this piece of evidence says we, quote, need motivating ideals to orient ourselves ourselves and our institutions. The 1NC is that ideal that we should use to orient and motivate ourselves and our politics, but they are not that because they believe that the world as is the only world that can be. The piece of Lloyd evidence that they read is a sentence of word salad. Prefer all the explanation of the alternative in the 2NC about the undercommons and about haptic healthcare. It solves the warrant in this evidence because haptic healthcare is a collective strategy, which means that it solves your atomized politics arguments. Go to the case debate. I'll do the data stuff first. The single payer enables global centralization of data that destroys transitivity, medical records, social security numbers, addresses, all get stored indefinitely, sold to third parties, or surrendered to the federal government search engines via warrants. Data sticks to individuals. Its toxic identification becomes tied to data and haunts trans people by tracing their former identity to the present. The impact debate was conceded in the 2AC. They only played link defense, so if we win a risk of a link, that's sufficient for you to pull the trigger. It causes a permanent tie to dead names, paper trailing, misgendering, the doctor's office. All proves the affirmative model of care is terrible. The link is that single payer creates an economic and institutional incentive to consolidate data through patient tracking, profiles, electronic medical records, centralized and cross-border databases, and sharing of data between clinics for collaboration. Like if you need to go to a specialist that isn't at your local clinic. They read this piece of Terry evidence to respond. I'll read a quote from it. Doctors are required to store and protect the records. The physician is the caretaker that has the responsibility for maintaining those medical records. Also doesn't respond to the argument that the federal government will use warrants to get your data, which wasn't answered. Their rereading of McKenzie. Yeah, credit industry does the link too, but so does the affirmative. It's a linear dissect. Here's a card that says single payer links. Saying in Il Donatis in 15 population studies and on disease updated info is carried out routinely insurance coverage. So Taiwan NHI database is one of the largest data files contain personal characteristics, sex, DOB, residence, employment, family, clinical info, expenditures, diagnosis, prescription exams, and operations. EMRs depended in standardized preventive foundation for a data exchange, a health cloud, large and longitude data of entire population for can use for study work conditions. The VA, Medicare, HMOs all have databases but are limited in challenges for including non-sharing multiple payer systems and firewalls. Randomized trials will benefit from the national linked databases. Centralized player research may avoid fragmentation or redundant findings. The debt arguments I read in the 1NC, they said they don't pay back the debt. That's not the argument. Moten is describing the distributional politics of the affirmative. They refuse indebtedness because they conceive the presumption provision of care as privatized and financialized. It's a way we understand our relationship. Their understanding, the doctor-patient relationship is I have insurance, therefore I have a credit to you and deserve care due to that credit. This transactional model of care leads to an interpersonal relations, a fucked up account for how we do care. It attempts to account for the way people show up or don't show up to us. We invest in care only because we see ourselves as having credit and that somebody owes us. It's a dispassionate relationship that is depressing, which should outweigh because our bonds to others are the only things that give life value, and calculated relationships fuck up those bonds.
721.
Because they said they wanted to cover that secure. Yeah, you're totally right.
On point answers that.
Yeah.
Can you save an extra document?
Yeah.
Computer crashes?
My computer crashes a lot. So let's make sure my partner has the doc. I'm not sending out any cards. I can give the order though. It is the coverage page, the agency page, the solvency page, and then it's the K. I'll obviously signpost on the K, but I will be starting on the overview really quick before transitioning into framework. A little about stuff.
This is like an updated.
Yeah, that's it. Are we all good? Yes? Okay. There's a systemic impact of millions of people who are suffering and dying, which we think is an important thing that the BAF is able to solve. The data arguments, physician as caretaker means that they don't have the legal right to be able to transfer records of the patient's consent. The Chuisi evidence says that the patients will be legally own it, which means that the HIPAA would make it so the government isn't able to access it. Even if there are economic incentives, they don't have the legal obligation to be able to get them in the first place, which means that even if data is toxic, they don't have any access of healthcare. The one piece of evidence about NHI is in the context of Taiwan, which doesn't apply to U.S. single-payer evidence. So nothing about the necessity of centralization because the permutation is able to resolve any sort of residual. In fact, 20, this McKenzie evidence about credit agencies, the alternative probably isn't able to resolve those, but if it isn't, the permutation is only able to solve the arguments of data being bad as well. It means that they only have one singular instance of data being bad was the case. Compared to that ways, the debt arguments, it doesn't apply to us because Moat is talking about a personal story that he's had a relationship with. It doesn't apply to healthcare because people don't want the Crusoe evidence.
Correct, they've had.
Oh, they've had that. They've had the Crusoe evidence answers all of their the Crusoe evidence answers all of the Crusoe evidence answers all the words about debt. It says that single payer makes it so we don't understand things as business transactions, but instead as necessities which individuals have to be able to have. It's an argument that we can access independent of any other. Even if we lose any of our framework arguments, the agency advantage. Health insurance interactions are fluid phenomena in which agency can be created for black patients. This has 3 implications. First, there's no impact to their offense because patients control exchange system will bail on shitty doctors, but to answer all their arguments about healthcare access being better. Most recent evidence proves that health insurance is malleable. Second is allowing patients to do this activates agency, which outweighs the key to a framework of value which provides a prerequisite to the alternative. Third is that there's a paternalism to their discourse. The idea that patients don't deserve the option of coverage insurance is the trope of black passivity, which you should vote them down because it's the violent representation. They don't have a key of insurance, which is what disadvantage is the defense of, which means we get a lot of offense here. We made a cruel optimism to which they have functionally dropped in the solvency page. The alternative replicates the flawed dynamics of false hope. People invest hope in the alternative and communicate the same way they criticize the optimism. Instead of the good comes about the perfect, which revives cruel optimism and turns the K, the solvency advantage proffer. They concede a lot of our contingency arguments, which means you shouldn't allow for cookie cutter explanations of balance, and you should send prefer the particularized impacts of the when you see the critiques overview. The alternative isn't able to solve the broad sort of structural impacts of power, whiteness, and dysphoria, which means the permutation is only able to solve it because we are able to remove the white cisgender capitalism of private insurance, which means that we are stepping in the right direction, even if we aren't able to actualize all sorts of change. The affirmative is a good idea and should be advocated for. The role of the ballot argument framework, you should choose which mechanism viably attains the best outcome. They need to prove that the app is bad relative to the status quo. We agree that the status quo is bad. That's the easy part, but they need to provide a unique set to the case. Our interpretation subsumes status quo. We can explore because we can explore the things that they think are important while assessing the productivity of health insurance. We just think they need to reason why the F is worse than the status quo. The Pareto evidence and the stall evidence are our normative impact things because our discussions are key to reconceptualize the way that we understand health insurance in the first place, which answers any sort of ticky-tacky fiat arguments that they can be able to go for in that they're going to go for in the 2 and R. Now the standard for a link should be health insurance specificity. Our 2 evidence says that health insurance is unique in its ability to be able to subvert dominant structures of power. Their only evidence is unique for us. People already engage in the state and health practices, which means that the agency advantages answers every single one of their links here because people are not forced to go to health in the world of the alternative. The consent argument, the alternative isn't able to solve this. No health data usage means that there's no planting things on sex workers. We've seen the alternative is able to solve it. They don't have to submit DNA. The crackdown argument, private insurance becomes illegal post-plan. Sorry, I goofed it in 1AC cross-ex, but Lauren was effectively able to clarify this. Enforcing its insurance, a financialization argument. When do we talk about any of this debt stuff? Caruso evidence says that we remove the discourse of business transactions at worst. We're initial, which means that permutation is able to resolve it. Reimbursement is infinite, which means that doctors will always be able to get money from the government. Either way, they would rather get good. They would rather give good care to people than get money for anything. That was an entire burnout advantage that we read for half of the year. We progressively tax the shit out of the rich, if anything, which is able to sufficiently mitigate the risk of financialization or capitalism. That's implicit in the 1AC. The 2AC evidence says that the behind those anti-neoliberal movements, which means that it's able to effectively lead to a transition towards universal healthcare and welfare movements, which solve all the impacts of these arguments. The the sociology argument about Weisfeld, it doesn't make the presumption that woman is biological. It doesn't say body or biology everywhere. I'm non-binary. I think that gender binaries are bad, but this evidence just doesn't make that fucking claim, which means you can't vote on this. You shouldn't deny the agency advantage because of it. At worst, you should strike it off the flow as a not good argument, but it doesn't answer any of this. It didn't extend any sort of offense on this. They didn't extend any sort of offense about the one that sees offense. So the only other argument they have left is the care argument. Care is a floor, not a ceiling. People can choose what they want through processes like participatory budgeting processes, which allow people to opt into the things that they want and have ensures to have care. The agency advantage answers the terminal impact of this. People can and will choose doctors and hospitals who don't impose things like gender binaries or make determinations of genders of babies whenever they're birthed. The sequencing argument, it's nothing. The orientation ideals will never turn around and result in tangible impacts for people, which means you prefer the permutation of anything. Perm do both. The only difference proves the F isn't that bad. If we do that all in other instances, the only difference between the perm and the alternative is direct material implications of the one. It's not a form of social arrangement or ordering. It's just a no-link argument which disproves exclusivity. Our case page present net benefits the perm because the links are speculative, not dissents to the F. You should group all the perm dissents, two things into them. First is the Carson evidence. Just because the two approaches differ doesn't mean we should declare them competitive. Dissents all assume that the F is antithetical to their arguments, but that's not true at all because they're compatible with each other. Second is competition. They need to win. The negatives of implementation outweigh the millions of lives the F saves and the agency activates. We can engage in the undercommons at all times, except for the F used to avoid big data and NSA surveillance by the government or credit agencies, but allow it for the explicit purposes of providing patients with the option of care. The alternative fails alone. It can't solve the case. One in state cross-sex says queer people know what they're doing and are going to be able to provide care is cruel optimism. In order to learn how to be a dentist, how to be an optometrist, you need to engage in the social order and social contract, which they have explicitly criticized. And the one in state, the alternative can solve it, and so can the permutation. They have no evidence for any of this. They've just sort of asserted that people in California know how to provide care. You should not presume negative on this because they've heard no evidence on any of these questions. And if they are wrong, then they foreclose care and they foreclose agency for people, which they've conceded has a sort of terminal impact, which trumps all of their other shit. They don't have any sort of turns case arguments for any of this, which means you should prefer affirmative on the permutation because it's the safest bet for being able to engage in these sorts of productive agency as well as engaging in communal care.
I'll tell you. Not for the late friend.
Also, do you want me to make McDonald's?
Oh.
Do you want what you had yesterday?
I'll go have some chicken nuggets.
Okay.
Like a 20-piece though. It'll be the criticism. Great. Ever good? I'm good.
All I can offer is a choice. Active healthcare is an orientation, practice, and framework for how we do care. Active healthcare is to be the means for each other. Care is a means. Without ends, active healthcare operates as a form of reimbursement that stays in debt, stays in study, that offers care regardless of reimbursement, not in the ways of credit and debt, the ways in which the affirmative is affirmed. Active healthcare is the touch of the undercommons whose touch is always a reach and negative balance. Asks you to reach back out to us. Our alternative is a commitment to care without reimbursement. I will clean your lesions. I will give without redress. Active healthcare is using the resources and skills that we have from our positions to be the means for one another. No matter how many times they tell us that we will die without them, their role of the ballot argument, your mechanism is violent outcomes that should not be affirmed. The affirmative, you can see in our framework argument that it is not just about the plan text, but rather if the affirmation in the 1AC is as should be is desirable. The negative wording is proof that the affirmative is undesirable. We have meant that we have uniqueness as to the ways in which they envision the world and the way they plan the debate. We are winning the sociality debate. We are winning a prior question about what determines the doctor's prescription. Our argument has always been that white cis normativity operates as a decision-making calculus that determines gender variance as risk that determines, for example, who gets saved at the scene of the crash. Alicia, Tyra Hunter, two trans women of color had access to care. They had access to an EMT, but they died because no one wanted to touch them. The affirmative gets the order wrong. The state doesn't create the family. The nuclear family scales up to the nation state. Hence the connections between the domestic and law enforcement that always seeks to protect the white family at all costs. This assassination just add their neutrality to the conversations of health, nationalizes assignation and therefore dysphoria. Their argument that we cover anything related to health is comes with a presupposition about what a healthy baby is, what a healthy person is. Our argument is that in the world of the affirmative assigns gender to babies in the world of the F means that trans and gender nonconformity have to go through the injurious process of coming out. The 2AC evidence believes that there's an essential group of people called women. This is our argument. It's not that you essentialize woman to female, but that you believe that there's an essential group of people called women. You cannot kick out of your evidence or scratch it from your flow. You have to lose for reading it because it implicates doctors. It implicates the care that you give. It proves, one, that babies get assigned a gender at birth because you believe that there's a group of people called women, i.e. girls in the world of the affirmative. It also proves my arguments about dysphoria. I'm sorry, there's people in this room. There are people in this room that are implicated by your interpolation of a group of people called women because it means I have to misgender myself in order to access their health disparities arguments that affect my body. I have to choose to misgender myself to go to the gynecologist to get health and reproductive care, but I often just choose not to go to the doctor. This takes out their tens of millions arguments because it still disavows and reinterpolates and rebrands more mode of care that interpolates that we are giving you a choice, but our argument is that you don't understand how that choice is coercive, how that choice coerces us to have to identify by the gender that we are assigned at birth, or B, not go to the doctor, which takes out your agency arguments and your preventive care argument. Also, your cross-ex. I'm sorry, in cross-ex of the 1EC, you said that agency is a framework of work that is a prior question to how we engage with others because we have to allow for people to have agency before we intervene. That's our argument about why you refuse consent, why you refuse and do not allow for people to have the conditions of consent in the world of the affirmative. You can see that dysphoria must be prioritized because intimate debate is an intimate site of violence. No matter how many times we prevent it, it's not dysphoria. Crisis holds us hostage, which means it forces us to live a life that we never were, i.e. crisis, which takes out your arguments about life. You can't win an argument about preventive death without questioning about what it means to life, what it means to live. We have to create the conditions for us to say no to the police, to say no to assignation and money on our own terms. Their argument is that we can just choose for these people to go to the doctor that are not anti-queer. I'm sorry, there's also a thing called parents. We don't get to choose what hospital our parents take us to. That's our argument about how about the denial of consent for gender non-conforming people in the world of the affirmative. The financialization just said we're winning it. We're doing specific work that tax the shit out of the rich is our link argument because it takes away a lot of their money, but not all of it. You want to narrow the distinction between the rich and the poor, but you do not want to abolish it. The best link is they're wanting our move to say that it's not that we're not about business transactions. It's about necessity. I'm sorry, your plan finances posits that money is never a question of ethical work, never something that we owe or deserve, but money is always a question of assignation and inheritance. Instead of giving up money, we need to give up money in its entirety. This is what haptic healthcare and a policy of indebtedness means. Yes, it is worse than the status quo because you create that cruel optimism that is not a benign move because you make us believe that the world will be less violent. Our argument is about how you have presupposed and come to the debate with believing that the police save us, which also our alternative provides uniqueness for our links because we have a reason to resolve them. They say, great. The data argument. Single parents advises in collection and consolidation even if the patient owns it. Doctors keep tracking the government and the cops can issue warrants to get the data, i.e. patient tracking, policing, medical records. We're the only ones reading about how single parent data and your evidence says that the doctors still own it. Our argument is that police are above the law and people that have drugs in their system get the state in the world of the affirmative means that the government can crack down on those people. It puts them in jail. That's an impact you haven't resolved. Well, there we go.
I didn't. Well, bring that up.
PACE, agency. Everything else on solvency that's relevant has already been folded in, so we're just going to go straight to the K after that. Everybody good? Cool. Extend the systemic impact. Tens of thousands of people are dying in the status quo every year from a lack of health insurance. That is a proximate cause that they have basically failed to answer throughout this week. Now the data turn, it's still not real. Physician as caretaker means no legal right to transfer records without patient consent. The HIPAA violations where it comes unanswered out of the 1AR, which says that it is illegal to transfer data between doctors because, again, the patients are the people that own the data. Doctors as caretakers means the patients have to authorize any transfers there. They said police are above the law, but when HIPAA violations prove that this probably isn't true in the case of the affirmative. And even if it is true, that means there's no alternative solvency because the alternative is fiated throughout the country. If it's not fiated, it is advocated throughout the country. That was cross-ex, which means there's constant enforcement against the alternative. This is justified new because this police are above the law warrant was new in the 2NR. If this takes out affirmative solvency, this also takes out alternative solvency, and you should default to the affirmative because only we have fucking evidence on anything. Yeah, the agency advantage. USC still does not know best, and this whole debate is about how queer people aren't capable of refusing interaction with healthcare if that's what best, and that's frankly insulting and turns the entirety of their marginalized populations deserve the chance to decide how they want to interact with healthcare systems. Single payer provides universal and complete access. Underprivileged populations are capable of exercising the agency to access healthcare in a way that counteracts current biases. They drop the paternalism does that the K ultimately says patients don't deserve the option of coverage because they'll underestimate how bad it can be. Reject that. You should still reject that on a representational level. It creates violent terms of the passive black patient. They have still not answered. I know it feels weird banging racism impact on a queerness round, but the impact is just as large, if not larger, than the critique, and is a net benefit to the permutation that they cannot resolve. Now that I'm gonna answer the no agency in the world of the USFG argument on this one because that's where it's most relevant. The main cause of lack of agency in healthcare is private providers, non-existence of the state husband study proves agency can occur in the contingent setting of doctor-patient communications. Winning contingency is another reason the agency to access healthcare is possible and important. The alternative also leaves the USFG intact, which means they can't resolve a lack of black agency, making the law completely useless on this particular question, in which case you can vote ACT on a chance of having the option that accessing healthcare is good and also if the alt can resolve it, so can the permutation, the critique. I'm going to make this very easy for you. The alternative endorses provision of care. The ACT is also provision of care. Their links are contrived and pit agendas against each other, which Carson says pulls us from distinction to dichotomy and is a faulty mechanism for establishing competition between arguments. Now extend perm to both. It resolves the choice between pills that the negative has presented you with. Haptic healthcare is a collective form of provision of care. The K is non-mutually exclusive with the affirmative, and you cannot vote on a non-mutually exclusive critique. The perm restructures our understanding of the insurance as to incorporate their understanding of queerness that they say is necessary for insurance systems and systems of provision of care to work. It also provides insurance that's coherent with our new understanding of how that should function. It's a crystallization act to capture all of their offense. We can disinvest from forms of financialization, except for in this specific instance of doing the plan, because that's partially going to be in the financialization link, but also because it's not inconsistent with the thesis of the plan, which is that we should provide care. Our perm is only as bad as the direct material implications of the affirmative. Any doubt in your mind about the alt's ability to both resolve all anti-queer care and establish a single payer healthcare system means you should vote affirmative on the perm. Now they can win. The financialization is bad, and the doctors are heteronormative, and you can still vote AF because the perm resolves your choice. The AF makes better outcomes that can help people in the world of the alternative. We can inspect and deconstruct financialization of heteronormativity while engaging in the best mechanism to make sure that cancer patient gets chemo. What about single payer prevents learning us to love each other? There's no cruel optimism. They said that their alternative invest hope in a new form. Our AF says it's okay to invest hope in a different form, and this was probably new in the 2 and now the financialization link. Care is monetized in the score. Our whole goddamn 1AC is about how fucked up private insurance is and how market systems fail. It's a critique of not going far enough. The 2NC said that we narrow the gap between the rich and the poor instead of eliminating it. That is an offense against the affirmative. That is a justification for the permutation. The 1AC is a shift from profit to care, which is never something we have grappled with. Caruso says that sets core reliance on the market to distribute healthcare entrenches a market logic into the minds of people who interact with the system, and that in a pedagogical study, people who are exposed to the idea of single payer shift how they evaluate care towards the direction of the alternative. The existence of the word finance in the 1AC is not the same as the reification of the ontology of money. It is still a movement towards a better end. And the existence of money in the world of the affirmative is secondary to the main goal of the affirmative. That was above. Now I'll answer the Weisfeld thing here. Yes, Weisfeld refers to a group of people as women. This is because there are people who identify as women, myself included. Weisfeld does not make the claim that gender is a static notion, does not connect women to a certain biological structure, does not confine what it means to identify with a gender, and does not refer to bodies of women. Yes, most people are gendered at birth. That does not mean the advocates for that ideal. This is kind of absurd. It doesn't turn agency arguments, because if a trans person encounter doctors who presume a static notion of gender, they can and will say fuck you to those doctors and find different, more accepting ones, but they can only do that under a system of single-payer healthcare, because status quo provider networks ensure that you have to go to a certain set of doctors' roles, or else it will not be possible for you to go to those doctors, because money exists, because yes, money does exist right now. Now, the sociology thing was not really extended that much, but I answer the embedded themes. The claims that there are no good options still rely on a conception of a static notion of health, and it's a dated concept that has gone completely unanswered throughout the round. Doctors are relearning what medicine is, because the diet of power is shifting. There are still some doctors that have anti-queer conceptions of health, but it's not all doctors, and patients see the option to pick and choose providers that aren't exclusive of queer people. The post-dating actually does matter in this round, especially when there's not any evidence on their side. Yeah?
Framework.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
It wasn't really extended through the framework. Wasn't really extended through the 2 hour. We get to weigh the affirmative. They say the affirmative is bad. That's fine. The alternative.
You're just like, it's
Okay. You should choose which mechanism viably attains the best outcome. They have to prove that when AC is bad relative to the status quo. We have decided the alternative, but there's no uniqueness to the case in our interpretive subsidiaries. We can explore ways that was above. Yeah. There are no pieces of evidence in this round about the alternative's ability to distribute healthcare broad scale across the country to resolve their instances of violence against queer people. They speak very well about how nice it would be if we all provide for each other, but that's not the same thing as actual provision of care, which only we have evidence on, which is how you should frame the round.
Good debate.
Yeah, NDT. Good debate.
You're done.
good debate.
You have your picture of that?
Thank you.
I was just trying to get back to like I clicked panel in decision and then open tab right again, now it's not like showing up judgment.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
But that's okay, it's fixed there, so that's all. I don't want them to, I want my ground.
Wow. Someone's gonna figure out the publish button.
Yep.
Congratulations, it's a 3-0 for the negative for the US. I'll go first one. I think that one of the biggest problems for the AF at the end of the debate is that the strongest parts of your framework argument just aren't there. I think that your framework argument needs to be at the very top. You need a very good, robust explanation of why plan focus should be first. You've basically conceded their argument that desirability has a very broad scope of evaluation. And there's not a clear reason why, if they win any link that maybe has some risk of turning components of the AF, especially the agency component of the AF, which I'll talk about a little bit later, those are sufficient reasons why I would reject the affirmative, even if there's a risk that you provide care to some people at some moment, because there are other examples of destroying people's lives, basically. I'll start on the case debate on this data argument. I think the negative is winning some risk of a link, especially with the feds get a warrant argument. I think that the impact explanation runs a little bit into the timer, but I think there's a clear policing argument that's kind of extended. The alt comparatively results in no data. I think you get a little too hung up on centralized data versus no data. I think that the argument that would have been at least somewhat more compelling to me would be saying that no data results in worse healthcare for people. You know, whether or not it's prescribing medication that people are allergic to, not knowing previous health conditions as a way, you know, I'm sure you are familiar with why health records exist. So I think they're winning probably some risk that there is a violent form of enforcing your type of healthcare. Like I said, this isn't super explained because it's the bottom of the 2NR, and it seems like you kind of knew that it wasn't your strongest argument. So there's not a whole lot of comparison on this question versus what I'm supposed to do with the AF. So at the end of the debate, for me, it's kind of a clear disad, but maybe it ends up being a tiebreaker if I'm not sure how to evaluate some of the other parts of the debate. But I think they're winning some pretty clear disads on the criticism that you don't deal with particularly well. I'll start with the assignation disad. I think that they're absolutely right that Weisfeld is definitely dichotomizing the relationship of women to men. The impact of this is dysphoria, that trans people are forced to lie about their gender in order to either access healthcare or simply refuse healthcare because they don't want to experience that type of violence in the doctor's office. Given that your real only answer to this is kind of link turn or like doctor choice, you're very, very reliant upon winning absolutely that doctor choice resolves in all instances. But I think that they're winning pretty clear examples of why the assignment of sex at birth is something that the AF doesn't circumvent. That's just a legal structure that doctors are required to impose, which means they have a very clear disad about maintaining the conditions of white cis supremacy, which creates dysphoria, it creates a loss of health care, it turns the agency arguments. So given the kind of framing things I talked about earlier, they have a pretty clear reason why I would reject the AF. This kind of goes hand in hand with their broader criticism of the white nuclear family being the dominant social formation. And the 2NR example for the impact argument is that of the car crash in the 2NC. I think it was knowing which trauma ward to go in. That no one wanted to touch the trans person, so they ended up dying on the street. These are just examples that you need to deal with. I'm not entirely sure what your version of single payer is going to do for this. I think it's based on the strategy that you'd have. You'd be very reliant on some version of the permutation being able to rely on solving these disads sufficiently. But you're largely conceding these questions, so it's easy for me to err negative on them. The financialization argument, I think you sort of misunderstand a little bit. I kind of understand the impulse of link turning this neoliberalism argument, but if their claim is money bad, and your response is, well, we move the money around a little bit, that's not terribly compelling to me. That having been said, I think that I would like to hear more about what the alt does to abolish the conditions of money. I get that that's like the goal and that it's ethical, and I kind of endorse that or whatever. But they are kind of lingering questions in my mind that you could probably interrogate a little bit better. I think they're probably right on this cruel optimism impact that taxing the shit out of the rich, invest in the sort of transcendent optimistic future which still maintains massive wealth disparity, particularly along racial lines, which certainly takes out the link turn argument, as well as generating the loss of agency argument, as well as just kind of external impact. Given that there are pretty clear links and impacts to these arguments, I don't think you're going to win a permutation. So.
No, yeah, thank you.
For me, financialization was pretty important. A lot of the other arguments I viewed as in a more case defensive position. Like the examples that were cited, that Shay just cited, for me focused how the affirmative does not solve the way they claim to, more than you make it worse. Like I'm not sure that, at least for the way I'm evaluating the round, I'm not sure that you increase assignation or the dysphoria associated with it as much as that is something you don't solve at all. And it speaks to an issue of like umbrella health care that is not fixed by the affirmative. And so it really cuts into like, even in the 2AR where we're extending to sort of 10,000 lives, I feel like there's a death by 1,000 cuts that's sort of happening from Southern Cal that's providing like, well, here's where to do this and the distrust here and these are the issues. And when they're making these arguments, for me, they're functioning as how much does single payer really resolve some of the important issues? And there needs to be some drill down a little bit into details of how does it fix it. The reason why that matters to me is because I agree that I thought the financialization argument was mishandled. I thought it began when the 2AC answered the Moten debt argument with, we don't talk about debt, and that was just perceptually puts us like, uh-oh. So that's not quite what Southern Cal was talking about. Where does this go? And it gets worse with the 1AR's argument that was repeated here about, no, we tax the shit out of the wealthy people. It's like, we're now weaponizing money is not the answer to money should be abolished type thing. I do want to focus more on my RFD though on the last things were said, which is I think the problem for me is the cross-examination of 1MC has to get some clarity on what the alternative, how it functions. I mean, in this round, I felt very comfortable voting for the negative because I felt their alternative was in this round allowed to do things that I don't really have to explain. The abolition of money is just one of them. Like, why is it that people are not caring for each other now in the way that the alt talks about? Like in some respects, you could even, like if we were just the high school debate round, you can even imagine the cross-examination of 1MC is, so you fiat every person on earth engages in this, like that sort of question. And it's like, yeah, kind of so, that is sort of what, and the reason why that matters for me is, at that point there is a difference of perhaps not just degree, but kind of world envisioning that's taking place. The affirmative is working sort of with what we have and trying to make it better. And the 2NC actually, they say, radical demands is what fiat should be about, and I think y'all's ears need to be perking up more on that part of the debate and realizing just how radical the alternative demand is. Not so much at the demand level, but at the poof, here it is level, Because ultimately, I feel comfortable voting for the negative because I think they solve a lot of the reasons why you would need to change the financing system, just because, hey, there's a trans person in Colorado who has their MRI machine that's going to share with somebody in California. Like just all of the weird anecdote half sentences that happen in this round in my head, I'm like, hold it, so what's going on? At the risk of creating some new ground, it probably is worth. I'm not sure that everyone has the skills necessary to this. The 1AR kind of gets it a little bit like, you can't be a fucking dentist if you don't engage the social order. But that was one of those sentences where I really wish that sentence had ended better than engage the social order. Like, how about without fucking reading a textbook about dentistry? Like, I may want to care for someone. That does not mean I am capable of caring for all of the things they need. And that level of detail will then get you back to, actually, some of the lives that are lost are not just because I preferred to touch someone over another. It's because I know how to intubate, or I know how to do medical shit. Now, obviously, the negative can go back and say, you don't need a government financing system to learn some of that stuff. But forcing that level of debate was necessary in this round because as it stood, the alternative is great for health. And it doesn't rely on the notion of money or the notion of the government. So that was sort of my quick RFD for how it went down. And then I think the last thing I would say is, I think you would benefit from more specific permutation arguments. I think relying on the perm do both, perm do the AF, and the all in all other instances just is not very helpful, because while I'm sympathetic and actually agree at some level with some of the 2AR's consultation of there's nothing mutually exclusive with this type of system and also us doing a better job of caring for each other, except at that financialization. And that's where I think you have to be like, and here's why we need it. In this debate, there was not, for me, a defense of this is why there needs to be a government financing system of healthcare. And absent that answer to that question, why do we need a government financing system of healthcare in a world where we can care for each other, I think the permutation needs to be a little more developed of, because what I was thinking about is, hold on, if I can do the alt in a world where the status quo exists, right? The status quo doesn't preclude the alternative from being a choice. So what if we voted AF, let's time frame permutation, work with me. If we voted AF and suddenly single payer was the status quo, we would still have the same ability to choose haptic care if the status quo were single payer as if it was the current system, which sort of gets back to what I was saying about the fiats that's being discussed, the worlds that we're talking about are not the same. These aren't the same conversations. Haptic care is not. And your card even talks, you read a card in your 1AC that sort of gets at this of, just because you posit two things as being different from each other doesn't make them mutually exclusive. You needed to ferret out the warrants of that, vis-a-vis your cross-ex questions that you needed to ask about the alternative and how it gets fiated, to sort of show that no, haptic care is not an alternative to single payer. It is something that exists over here, but it's not like, no, we should not do single payer, instead we should do haptic care. Like, no, we should not think about a world, and this is where I think the negative is way stronger and persuasive. We need to think about the world differently so that we're not asking, hey, maybe we should do single payer, but rather, are there larger structures like financialization, like power, as described in several examples, that those need to be, which is why when they make their sequencing argument and their prior question arguments on the permutation, if y'all are going to extend your permutation, you got to answer those specifically, because that was sort of a DOA for me. Like this permutation had none. Like even if I agree that there is a little bit of your mix and a little bit of their mix that can be done, the 2NC is very persuasive on permutation as a matter of arrangement, not merely mix. You don't just throw the ingredients in the bowl. You have to decide which one goes first, and that sequencing and these sorts of questions, like they're way farther ahead on that. And so in the end, absent that, I'm like, yeah, the alt solves anything I would want to do with health, and it doesn't financialize transactional situations the way Caruso says single payer makes it slightly better. They make it a lot better. And so there you have it. That's sort of where I came to.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
So yes, financialization, yes, assignation / what is health?
Oh yeah, what is health?
That gets to be overdetermined. Yes, alt is like world government plus fiat on a massive freaking scale that solves everything, as evidenced by the 2AR going for a double bind and saying we solve all the links. But that means it solves the AF for a large extent. Not so much for the data on me, it's just sort of a time allocation question. So all of that, yes. I want to offer just some suggestions and start from there, because I don't have much to offer in terms of how the debate was decided. I would recommend you all rethink this 1AC a little bit. I think it's a great 1AC against an AF that's just going to be theoretical pessimism. I think it's a terrible 1AC against this style of an alt. I think that you need 3 or 4 more cards that say that healthcare has to be specialized. And that, like, when we need cancer treatments, we need chemotherapy machines, and those are located in specialized places. And I think you probably wanted to impact turn data centralization and create that as a point of offense. And I would be very careful about the Taiwan evidence you read. We had the exact very, very, very similar debate to start the year, and the AF team actually advocated for Taiwan because of their unique way in which they hide the data. And there is some evidence that goes the other way that says that the way that they centralize their data is not exploitable compared to other single-payer regimes that are. To get more to this specific debate, I think that Your crackdown argument is a good one in the 2AR, and I wish it would have been in the 2AC, and there's great evidence about how when there has been forms of abolitionist medicine, and I think you needed to divide this alt into two parts. Part one is the idea of care overriding everything, a sense of love, a sense of haptic touch. Part two is literally the provision of medical services. And I think if you divide and recognize a permutation, like, look, we can have haptic touch and agree with that, but disagree with the practice of abolitionist medicine outside the law, because that's not gonna work, both from a sense of we need to share the information within the law and the law can be useful, and in a sense of, you're right, police crackdown, that changes how the permutation functions, and recognize that the alt has multiple levels. The other kind of big push I would like to make is that the alt needs to have a praxis. And so I think what you wanted to push in this debate is what Shay is talking about, this framework argument, that you need a method by which to get this out. But the only way that that argument works is if you win, the debate should be about what strategy we could use at the governmental level. I think you all should have fought back a little bit harder, because the value of haptic touch is what it does within spaces, immediate spaces. And so make that part of your framework argument, that the lack of care they have demonstrated in this debate comes first, because that is something immediacy. So use haptic touch in this space would be a big push on my part. The other last suggestion, and maybe you don't want to do this, but I think that there is some room for impact turning the idea of queer touch as well, or at least implicating the idea that it is always universally amazing. In other words, there is potential for violence amongst individuals, and saying we should love one another, again, gets back to the praxis question. How do you achieve that? And so if you, can someone just say, okay, I'm gonna be awesome and let's engage in a haptic touch relationship in the moment, and then utilize that for a sinister purpose, right? And I understand that they're gonna fight back on that, but I do think that there's some room, and maybe that's a demonization, they're gonna go after you and say that's ridiculous, but I think you're gonna come back and say, look, that demonization is potentially possible. And so, I don't know, I felt like you gave so much and there wasn't consistency on how you approached the alt. It was, the 1AR was, your alt's fucking ridiculous, I'm gonna go off on a paragraph, and I'm like, I'm feeling some of this, and then the 2AR is like, the alt solves the link. And then so it was like, there wasn't consistency in the approach. The only negative major suggestion outside of utilizing haptic touch to kind of build the framework argument about care within this space is, I think you're inherently making an argument that bureaucracy mediates and stops the possibility for haptic touch, because bureaucracy removes us from the person, it becomes the paperwork, it becomes the statistic. And I think that that's just a way to explain why it is that a permutation can't overwhelm that, because it has to be based upon the personal relationship. And the minute you say that the government is determining something for everyone, you assume that that trickle down can be productive. It can't, because the reason haptic touch works is because it is personal. It is there in the moment, and bureaucracy stops that from happening. And so those are my suggestions, and happy to deal with questions from you.
No, that was super comprehensive.
That was very
Thank
comprehensive. Thank you all very much. Good luck to both of you all.
Thank you. I do have one quick question, because the alt is all the things and all the great things. Would it be useful to have a better push on why those kinds of radically utopian imaginaries are not just good, but a competing methodology of engaging politics than what they have provided, which is a pragmatism dealing with what we are, with what we have? Would that, in a debate where we're pushed more on what the alt does, would that kind of argument be helpful for you all, or is there?
I think you have to rethink how this debate goes down if they don't say agency comes first in the 1AC.
Yeah.
You've got to establish that that is the right. I mean, you all were given the biggest sort of gift to your strategy in the first cross-X question, when they're like, agency overrides everything. And you're like, I'm not going to argue with that. Thank you very much.
I mean, we build our negative strategy. Yeah.
And so I think that you would have needed to kind of foreground a value, space, moment. Here's why that outweighs potential risk of cancer, or whatever that means in that context. So I think impact framing would have been the key part that you didn't have to do in this debate, and it might alter how you make some of these arguments in an app that's just like, we save some lives.
Oh, I guess I do have a question related to that. We read that because we thought we could use it to like hedge back against their angle. And I realize now there was also, like, it kind of backfired a little bit, but can you think of any ways that we could, like, I don't want to just weaponize, but the way we could use that more in this debate? Just like the fact that we front agency in the 1AC.
It's not a wise decision.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think maybe just read the stuff that you want to talk about. Like you referenced later on in this, which Hurlism just said, that they removed that option. And that was one of the things I was struggling with, because the 2AR is correct, the alt does not get rid of the state, right? Like, and that's why it's so hard to have conversations about the plan and the alt, because they're taking place in two different rooms, in two different disciplines. And so it's like, in a world of the alt, there still is private insurance, there still are these things. And so on the one hand, the affirmative benefits from saying, hey, that's not going to work for everyone, sort of what y'all were kind of getting at in some of your cross-examinations of like, hold on now, so like, how are people in California going to get this? Like that's where it's tough, because in the time pressures of a competitive debate round, we don't have enough time to really just dwell in the moment of these scenarios of, how would this scenario work? But kind of skip ahead for the judge and move and be like, no, this is critical. There are going to be people who go to doctors, even in the world of the alt, because not everyone's going to have someone. There are individuals who don't feel, they're right, there are people who don't trust the medical establishment. There are people who don't trust other people, right? So what are they going to do? And all these sorts of conversations. And so that's why I was sort of saying at the end how you could have haptic care in a world where the single payer was this other option, sort of thing. And thinking about a permutation in that realm means starting with don't foreground it as agency, but rather just sort of opportunity, maybe, like options, having some things on the table that are options. But yeah, I agree that was, unfortunately, did not set y'all up very well. Yeah.
Is there a way in which to articulate the alternative similar to the bureaucracy argument that's like money is exactly that, like that it creates that gap between each other?
Yeah, I liked his notion of, if the affirmative is going to advocate a policy change, then I think it's fair for the negative to say they're stuck with that, and we're going to provide some alternative ways to think about that. And one way is your alternative is not an alternative to single payer, it is an alternative to single payer advocacy, right? That what you're doing is not presenting, instead of single payer, we should do this, but instead of coming upon this subject matter and determining this is what we should be calling for, we should be thinking about this at a much deeper level. That the affirmative has assumed too much, they've left in place too much, right? And we want to challenge some of those systems. And so our alternative, that's our alternative. Alternative is a different way to think about healthcare advocacy, not a different way to think about healthcare policy. Does that make sense? So I think you can do that, and that helps. Yeah.
Thank you all very much. Good luck to both of you.
Good luck to y'all too.